Hey everyone, welcome back to The Lookout. A couple weeks ago, I got invited to give a keynote address at a conference here, Chico State, on resilience, and they wanted me to talk about the campfire, big fire that burned here in Butte County, 2018. And so here's my talk. It's about the stories we tell about the places we live and how they shape our understanding and ability to live in those places. Hey everyone. We've got a land acknowledgement here. I wanted to see if I can edit it though. If I could edit it, I would say, instead of saying we're humbled that our campus resides on sacred lands that have sustained the Mechoopda people since time immemorial, I would say we're ashamed that we stole their lands, especially in the 1960s, and tried to get them disenrolled from being an official tribe. And we shouldn't have done that. And we're sorry that we built the Mechoopda dorm on land that was theirs, because then we couldn't give it back to them. So I wanted to talk about, the theme is storytelling, telling better stories around the campfire. I'm a geographer. I didn't really know what that was when I went to school here. I wasn't sure what geography was. I was a graphic design major, and I thought, man, if I do this work, I'm going to be on a computer all the time. And so I became a cartography major because I found out you could actually get a degree in map making through the geography department. And so I took cartography classes and ended up being on a computer all the time doing graphic design of maps. But I didn't quite understand what geography was. And what I've come to understand over the last 30 years working as a geographer is that geography is kind of the Western science name for land knowledge. And that we hear about traditional ecological knowledge. We all have TEK in our own lineages. We express those through story and song and art. But there's always been a role for storytelling in how we communicate about the places we live, about what we have learned about what's important, about how to exist in these places. That's really the original science. Traditional ecological knowledge is practiced through millions of years of experimentation and living in place and experimenting, trying things, seeing what happens. TEK doesn't just belong to Native people. We were all Native at one time, somewhere, in some place. And geography is kind of a modern day way in which we can reconnect with the places we live. Geographers use tools, just like people have always used tools to tell stories. Some of the earliest maps were arrangements of sticks. That we know of. When we work on fires, if you don't have a map, you're drawing a map on the hood of the truck in the dirt, or on a windshield, or just on the ground. But that use of tools is kind of what defines modern day geography. I had a business card I made when I was working as a grad student. I wasn't actually a grad student, but I was a graduate assistant, because that was how they could pay me. And Eugenie Rovai, she saw my business card and it said, technical geographer. She's like, well, that's redundant. Because that's what we do as geographers. We use technical means to talk about land. So stories we decide to tell, they have power. And they shape how we collectively understand our place in the world, the place where we live. And the mediascape that we live within also affects our mental landscape, which affects our physical landscape. The stories that we choose to amplify, the stories that get clicks, or the stories that sell ads, are the ones that kind of collectively shape the mind of people about the places they live in and how they should interact with those places. So I used to get Adbusters magazine, and it talked about the importance of maintaining your mental environment. And back then, their approach to that was billboard jacking, right? Media jacking, going up and pasting something over the Gap billboard that says everyone in sweaters, so it says everyone in sweatshops. Right, so location matters, place matters. And we're going to talk about paradise, and the stories we've been told are important about paradise. And how can we amplify other stories, other approaches to understanding the landscape we live in. I think it's interesting to revisit paradise and the story of paradise in the aftermath of the LA fires. Because many of the same themes that emerged post-paradise are emerging in Pacific Palisades. I'm waiting for Ron Howard to go make a movie about the kind of powerful community spirit that's banding together for people to rebuild their mansions. But we've come to expect this kind of narrative. A friend of mine, Timothy Inglesby, he describes the media approach to wildfire as a three-legged stool that's victims, the homeowners and the people who've been affected by fire, valiant heroes, the firefighters, and the villainous fire. If you've got those three elements, you can write a story for any major publication about a fire. And some reporters complain, oh, it's almost like find and replace. Replace the fire name, replace the name of the people. Same story. But not everyone is an innocent victim. And I think that as long as we stick with this framing of wildfire, we miss opportunities to improve our understanding of the landscape. If you build a sandcastle below the high tide, are you a victim when the tide comes in and the next morning your sandcastle is gone? The tide is kind of synonymous with other predictable events we have, like the Jarbo Gap winds that blow through Paradise, the Santa Ana winds that blow in Southern California. But this victim lens, it disempowers people, and it strips the context from important stories. So I started my career here in geography. After I graduated, a friend of mine got me a job working in the foothills. There was a lot of interest in these streams here, the Chico Creek and Butte Creek, because at that time the salmon were maybe going to be listed as endangered species. And when that happens, it's bad for the economy. It's bad for farmers. It's bad for loggers. It results in restrictions of land use and restrictions of important economic activity. And so no one wanted that to happen, so there was a lot of money spent on improving the conditions for salmon. And part of that was to understand better what the conditions were in the upper watersheds here of Butte Creek and Chico Creek. That was my first work as a geographer, I fell into being a fire planner because I'd worked on a fire crew for a couple fires and I knew how to use maps. And so then the guy who was supposed to write the fire chapter for these reports on the conditions in the foothills, he flaked out. He was a recreation professor, go figure. And he had more important things to do. So they needed someone who could do fire planning, and they're like, well, you were on a fire crew, and I was like, yeah, I went to like 2 fires. They're like, all right, well, write these fire chapters. So as a geographer, my core instinct was to talk to people. So I went and I talked to all the fire chiefs that would talk to me. A lot of them wouldn't answer my calls because they're like, oh, some guy from Chico State wants to talk to me. What I learned in that experience is that people in the community outside Chico State that aren't in academia didn't really like Chico State. They didn't like the university meddling around and telling them how to manage their water or looking at how they were building their roads in the foothills. Anyway, so we started looking at these watersheds, and I just kind of became a fire planner. It turns out that there's no curriculum for becoming a wildfire planner. You just start talking to people and writing about it and using your maps, and then I just turned a guy into a fire planner last year. He was a journalist, and he came to work for me, and now he's a fire planner because he knows how to ask good questions. He knows how to find a story, a thread. So that's what being a geographer is just talking to people, finding the thread that's interesting, setting it to maps, communicating it. So around that time, they were just starting to do GIS mapping in fire camps, and I kind of fell into that through this planning work in the foothills, and because I'd talked to a lot of the local fire people and kind of asked them for their data and stuff. And so we had this lightning storm that took off, and it burned all over Butte County. That turned into a career in fire mapping. So I was already doing some fire planning. I knew about the fire, but it turned into kind of this field of using data to understand what were happening on fires and then making maps for the firefighters. So one of the things that happened then was I was talking to John Hawkins, who's kind of a legendary CAL FIRE chief, and he told me, Paradise is going to burn down. This was 1998. He said there's going to be a big fire, probably be, like kind of an east wind, and all the roads out of town are going to get blocked, and lots of old people are going to die, and nothing we're going to do is going to change that. And that got my attention, so I wrote a report in 1998, and I covered some of this stuff. I said, Butte Creek Canyon, if you look at the town of Paradise here on the ridge, the red is the campfire, and Paradise is on this steep ridge surrounded by inaccessible steep land that you can't really cut brush on or anything else. And so it wasn't too hard to see what he was talking about. I recently talked to a woman named Sue Husari, who was retired fire, kind of West Coast fire chief for the Park Service and the Forest Service. And she said she was working in Butte Meadows on a fire engine in 1977. And she said, we knew in 1977 that the Jarbo Gap winds were going to blow a fire into Paradise and it was going to be a major disaster. Right? So that was 40 years before it happened. 20 years before it happened, I wrote my report, but no one cared because it was just this random fisheries kind of focused report for an agency that, like, no one really wanted to read a report about that. Like, it's a lot of planning that happens. Is someone pays you to do this work and it sits in a binder. So it wasn't like we were going to change the outcome by like writing a report about it. Anyway, fast forward to 2008, and a big fire almost burned up Paradise. Big fires burned in 2000, 2008, and I'm just going to bite the bullet here and find the layer I need. So one of the things that's happened throughout my career is I've been a librarian, right? I've built this huge archive of geospatial data. First, on my own. Second, as an employee of a consulting group. Third, as an owner of a mapping company. And then just always as a researcher. You know? So one thing that's happened across my career is that GIS data has kind of become something that lives on the web. When I first started doing this work, there was no internet. So when we went to a fire, we would have like a CD, a big pack of CDs that had the scanned topo maps. And that was about it. We had dial-up sometimes, but we didn't need it to do our work. We had what we needed. I've always hoarded data because I haven't trusted that that data will always still be on the web. And what we see right now with the current kind of federal situation is that data disappears. If you want a climate change data set that you're used to downloading from, you plug in your ArcGIS online and you pull up, I want to see, climate impacted foothill vegetation communities. Oh, I had the word climate in it, so like it got pulled off the server, right? So it's a good time to own your own data, and so as researchers, as students, as storytellers, you look at any old book of the wise old person, and they got their big room full of books they sit in. I encourage you all to build your own archives because it's important to maintain ownership of the material that you need to do your work. So in the 1990s, all these little green areas we had a big lightning bust, and that burned a bunch of area all over Butte County. In the 2000s, we had fires in Concow. And then in 2018, we have the campfire. It looks quite different now. We've got the Dixie fire. But that's part of the story here is that we've always had fires in this area. And how is it that the fire chief knows and tells everyone that this place is going to burn down, but that doesn't make it into kind of the popular consciousness? How is it that we're surprised when Paradise burns down, when people who've been thinking about this have known it for 50 years? And the implications of that, of failing to make that a story that we want to talk about, that same story is playing out all up and down all over the world, but especially in California, if you look at where people live. So if we look at structures in California, all these yellow dots are places that we've got a lot of people living, structures. And if there hasn't been a fire yet in Yuba County, Nevada City, Grass Valley, Colfax, there will be one. And we know that our communities, our old communities, our rural communities, they are flammable. And we'll talk a bit about why that is. But it shouldn't come as any surprise when Grass Valley burns to the ground, when Nevada City burns to the ground. It's going to happen. And if we had been thinking this way before Paradise burned down, we might have had a plan of what to do when it happened. But we didn't. So in that kind of vacuum, we're rebuilding the same exact urban footprint that was there before the fire. Nothing that we're doing, we can talk about wildfire mitigation and fuels mitigation and zone zero and home hardening and everything else, but that doesn't change the fact that the Jarbo Gap wind doesn't care. So when we talk about the Jarbo Gap and the geography underlying the campfire, let's just zoom out and look at this is the Sierra Nevada mountains here, and this is the Cascade Mountains, and right kind of, Paradise is really where those two mountain ranges that basically transect the entire west coast, they come together at Paradise. And the Feather River Canyon here is it's basically the largest watershed in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So there's the Feather River Canyon, North Fork, if you drive up Highway 70, it's the only river that originates on the east side of the mountains. It was enough established when the mountains uplifted to keep cutting down through the mountains as they rose with geology. So what happens is that entire watershed, we know that as geographers, we know that cold air drains downhill at night. It's heavy at night, it sinks, it flows over the landscape. And so some people say that the Feather River is like the lungs of the Sierra Nevada. But it's also this low point in which continental scale weather can move from the interior of the entire continent out to the west coast. So when we have high pressure kind of cold air sitting over the Great Basin, and we have a storm off the west coast that's low pressure, we know that weather systems and air moves from high pressure to low pressure. So when we talk about these Jarbo Gap winds, we have winds up and down the canyon every night just from the water in this, from the air in this watershed draining on the Feather River. But we have this extra impact when we have continental scale weather that we just know that the geography is set up to bring heavy winds into Paradise. And so what happened in 2018 was those winds came like they always do. Similar to what happened in Palisades, the Santa Ana winds always come. But what was different with both the campfire and the Palisades fire was that we had no measurable precipitation for a really long time before that happened. So, you know, Santa Ana wind season is kind of, we usually have fires if we're going to have them in, you know, October or November, because usually after that we get some rain. But we still have Santa Anas all through the winter, and they kind of peak in January and February. So what was unique about the Palisades fire was that it was dry. We hadn't had our normal kind of late fall rains. And so the Santa Anas came and they blew across a really parched landscape. So the same thing happened in Paradise in 2018. We didn't have any rain all summer, really didn't have any all fall. The wind blew hard for several days like they do when we have these big windstorms, and then they often kind of culminate with a final crescendo, a big wind event. So on the morning of the 8th of November 2018, a fire started over here in Polga. We know now there was a power line that fell, a power line that was stressed from 100 years of those winds coming all the time and those insulators swaying back and forth. And you may have seen like a picture of the hook, the big metal hook that just slowly ground itself away over the course of blowing back and forth in those winds for maybe 80 years. Anyway, the fire started, and this is, I think, a really incredible image. I made this right after the fire. And this is about 3 or 4 hours into the fire. And the fire started down here, it blew up the hill, and it scattered all over the landscape, right? It blew up this canyon that was really steep and deep. It ran kind of uphill with the topography. It got to the top of the hill, and then it just, you know, the wind blew up here, blew up here. Like, wind doesn't just blow in a straight line, it gets funneled by the topography. And it rained fire all over the Concow Basin. You know, high winds, embers flying a mile or two. And so immediately Concow was on fire within the first hour. And then it just kind of hopscotched this way, burned up onto these ridges, and it just threw embers all over Paradise. And so this image, this comes back to kind of the technical side of being a geographer. I got a satellite image from Landsat, which goes over every like 13 days or something. And it was like just kind of luck that it happened to go over this morning when this fire was happening. I used tools I learned how to use at Chico State to create this image. This is an image made from various bands of light radiation. It's not like a photo. This is a rendering of infrared bands of light and visible bands of light and other things. So the technical side of being a geographer is that I use remote sensing techniques to create this image, because you can't, on the main, if this is just a photograph, it's all smoke. You can't really see what's happening. But we can use my geography tools and see through that smoke. And that creates this compelling image of yellow dots, each one being a home on fire. That's the technical story. The thing that you can't capture in an image like this is that some of you were in this photo. You're too small for us to see. But some of you were trapped in cars. Some of you were trying to get in there to get your pets. the human element of this story is the one we care about as storytellers. It's the one that's hardest to tell. So I got choked up today making this stuff. You know, I spent the winter working up in Paradise, and it was just a numbing experience to be in these landscapes. There's the technical side of all this, and then there's like the part where you just like, where your job takes you out. And so that happened to me a couple, you know, after doing this work and just like plugging in and doing the stuff automatically. It's like, oh, there's a disaster. I'm just going to go on autopilot and make my maps and tell stories. And that's not sustainable. I found out, like, that'll take you out, where, you know, maybe you can't talk for a while. Maybe you lose your words. Maybe you become prone to rages. Other stories that are hard to tell. Untold stories of the campfire. This is an image taken the next spring. This image shows green up, or where there's still forests. And red is areas that burned really hot. Green is areas that are still forest canopy. And I think one thing that's interesting in this image is that red is the final place that the fire got to. And you see there's a lot of green forest in there. And so I think the campfire burned 150,000 acres. Only thing anyone thinks about when they think about the campfire is the devastation, the most destructive fire ever. Most people killed in a modern wildfire, most structures destroyed, all these metrics that we're kind of used to, and we kind of start trying to compare the worst disaster ever. Is it most homes destroyed? Is it the most acres? Is it the most valuable real estate? That's another thing you're going to be assigned to do as an academic, as a geographer. It's like, how do you use data to ascribe meaning to the impact of something like this? As an ecology-minded person, I'm like, well, that is pretty awesome that this whole area of the Feather River burned in a natural kind of regime, right? Like positive ecological effects, benefits for the ecology of this area that has been fire suppressed for a century. So here's a video of, this is the Feather River Canyon, and this is the area we're talking about. So this is looking from Highway 70 across at the south, or kind of the east side of the Feather River. This is what we call the burn mosaic, right? You can see that it burned, there's places where it burned hot, there's places where it didn't burn hot. This is what this particular landscape has done forever. When a fire burns, it's a result of the way the wind was blowing at the time, the fuel moisture, everything else. But a lot of these barren areas out here were already barren before the fire. So I think that's another important story that gets neglected, is that even the most destructive fire can have really great ecological benefits. We get caught in this narrative, we're like, oh man, worst fire ever, but we neglect the fact that, like, hey, that area of the Feather River landscape needed fire, and it got it, and because it was November, we got positive fire effects. And that part of telling the story is to understand that you can have really critical fire danger conditions on one day, and the next day you could be prescribed burning. We were prescribed burning on November 8th, 2024, because the conditions were right. Helping people parse out when to be afraid and when not to be afraid is a really important part of us being able to inhabit high-risk areas. If you live in Paradise and you're afraid that your house is going to burn down from the 1st of May until December 1st, like, why live there at all? But if you can parse that and say, like, oh, I need to be worried because there's an east wind event coming and it hasn't rained yet, you might come to recognize that there's only maybe 5, 6 critical fire weather days of the entire year, sometimes even over the entire decade, right? And so that's one of the stories that we need to tell, to help people understand, how do you parse available information? Because firefighters, fire managers, land managers, we have these tools. We've built these incredible resources for monitoring fire risk for the entire country. Every region of the Forest Service has a coordination center where they spend millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars analyzing weather, analyzing fuel moistures. People are out burning brush, or they're out gathering fuel moisture samples and weighing them and doing science all over the country all the time for us to know this stuff. But if people in Paradise can't grok that, don't have access to those resources, don't have people telling that story, they live in this kind of unnecessary heightened sense of hysteria around fire. And what that means for people like me is that we have a really hard time doing prescribed burns. People say, how could you burn on November 8th? It's insensitive to all of us who are traumatized by seeing smoke. For me to look up in the mountains on November 8th when I'm already feeling upset, you're being insensitive to me. And I say we're burning on November 8th because it's a burn day. And we don't have as many burn days as we need to get the work done. Last thing I want to show you here, while we're still in Mapland, is this is another common satellite image product called NDVI. This is after the campfire. This is before the campfire. So some places are less green, some places are more green. The places that are more green are the foothills because they're greened up because it's spring. This image before is fall, and so the foothills are dry. But Concow has a lot of trees. This side of the Feather Arrow has a lot of trees. So post-fire, less greenery. It's just scale's really important in the work we do. You know, we have different tools we use to talk about a county or a state or a continent than we do to talk about a specific neighborhood. It's really like one of the tricks of the geographer. You think of drawing, you know, it's a drawing trick too. They blow something up big and draw it and take a photo and make it small and it looks really cool. Same thing with geography, like that's how we make detailed maps. We blow it, we get up close. In the old days, we would like, you know, use a whole wall on a projector or something. Now you just zoom in. But these tools are really useful for telling, you know, different stories at different scales. One thing I wanted to say here in this is just that there's a lot of work being done right now with remote sensing to try to like count every tree in the frickin' planet. Because people think if we can do that, then we can sell these trees to that guy who wants to keep burning coal over here. And that, I was thinking today that sometimes it might be worth considering if everything you know about carbon, everything you think about carbon, is a result of stories that people have told you who want to make money selling carbon from one person to another. Because trees are going to grow whether someone pays for carbon offsets or not, right? The planet's going to make carbon whether I get paid to plant trees or not. Like, trees are going to grow there. Vegetation really wants to grow where we live. But this whole idea that somehow by like quantifying every tree in the world, we're going to like come up with a market-based solution that's going to solve global warming. Like, I've been watching for the last 20 years carbon offset plantations burn in wildfires because that's what happens. Fire doesn't care if your plantation's in a carbon offset or not. It's just fuel, right? So with that, we're going to take a tour up through Paradise. We're going to start in Lower Paradise here. Kind of just going up the Skyway, like right when you get first stoplight. And this was yesterday. And we're going to drive up the Skyway up to Magalia. And then we're going to go across the dam in Magalia, and we're going to go up here. And you see, in Magalia, there's the campfire, and then there's the not campfire. And very dramatic kind of expression of fire effects when you cross that line. And so I drive this, and I hate going to Paradise. I don't go to Paradise unless there's a chance for me to go through Paradise to burn something on the other side. And so yesterday I had a chance to do that, so I drove up there and I shot this video. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means. Last thing before we go on the trip, though, is I think it's really important to think about your assumptions of what a place is supposed to look like and how long it's been that way. We all knew Paradise as this shady, cool, dark, not hot in the summer, quirky, lots of funky sheds, like sweet little kind of hillbilly collection of stuff. But how long has it been that way? Just because it was like that in our lifetime, does that mean that that's the way Paradise is supposed to be? Does that mean it's always been that way? Another great thing we've got as geographers is there's these people have been flying around in airplanes taking air photos in an organized fashion now for like 90 years. And so here's an air photo of Paradise taken in 1951. And it was all orchards. People were growing apples and pears on the ridge. It's too hot in the valley. Apples don't really grow that well when it's super hot. They need cool nights. So like here's the Skyway. Here's Pearson Road. And you zoom in and it's like, man, that doesn't look at all like what I thought Paradise was supposed to look like. I thought Paradise was supposed to look like this. Right? And it's like, no, it looks like that now. That's 1951. So okay, so that's 62 years. 62 years of since these photos between them, right? Magalia is kind of the same story. So if we look at Paradise now, post-fire, looks a lot like it did 75 years ago. It's open. It's not all shady pine trees. It's not all quirky and cool. It's just open. Before this, what was it like before we cleared it all off and grew apple trees? Oh, it was maize, a lot of oaks. But this, you know, we see the rebuild paradise, all this, the heart paradise and the pine tree. Why the pine tree? Pine trees, they drop all these pine needles, and you'll see in a minute, that stuff burns really good, carries fire really well. If this was all oaks, it would burn differently. But think of a pine tree, like when we do burning, if you have one pine tree on an acre, it sheds enough pine needles to carry fire across that. In areas that don't have pine trees, if we're burning, you know, like oak litter or something, sometimes the fire won't even burn. And then it starts to burn better, and you look up like, oh, there's a pine tree over there, that's why. So I think it's important, like when we think of how we want the landscape to look in the future, you know, and that's part of our job as geographers, figure out how to manage land. Well, what was it like before? We've got great tools for this kind of modern era, and then we have to rely on folklore and people that we know. I know this is apples and pears because I work for an old guy that was a fire chief for CAL FIRE starting in the 1950s. And so that's one of those benefits I got of going and talking to the old fire guys. And that's why we should tell stories. That's why we should cultivate stories. Why we ask your elders, ask anyone who will tell you a story to tell you a story. File it away. If you have a map, it helps you share that story more specifically. So we're going to drive up through the Skyway, up into Magalia. Here's Magalia looked like in 1951. There's nothing there, right? Paradise Pines, which is this neighborhood here, was built in the 60s, I think, as a retirement community. A lot of small homes, mobile homes, kind of affordable retirement. This is all black oak. Black oak's great. Black oak doesn't crown fire. Right, black oak has nice fluffy leaves that fall and make it really easy to burn in the winter. During a forest fire, it's really rare for black oaks to crown fire. But when you take that away and you plant a bunch of conifers, or you plant a bunch of rosemary or juniper, lavender, all these plants, when you go to the nursery and you say, I live in Magalia, and they're like, well, you need to plant deer-resistant browse because the deer are going to you're actually in a migration herd of one of the biggest deer herds in the West Coast, and they're going to come massacre your garden. So plant these deer-resistant browse. And they're deer-resistant because lavender, juniper, rosemary, they taste like gasoline because they've evolved these phenolic compounds to prevent herbivory so they can survive in places with browsing animals. So they burn, like we would call them like little gas cans, right? So not only do you go and plant all these flammable houses across the landscape, but then you surround them with like the most flammable non-native vegetation known to man. Anyway, so this is the campfire, burned up Magalia. But before that, Magalia was oak forest and lots of deer. Oaks are important for deer eating the acorns, for turkeys eating the acorns, for people eating the acorns. Oaks are really important. So I want to see a bumper sticker that's Paradise with an oak tree and a heart. And I'll put that one on my car. Anyway, on up through, they call this the Wood Hood up here. I don't know if any of you are from Magalia. Dirt streets and hard times. And so we went up yesterday up to the top here to Nimshu Ridge. And we burned right on the edge of Butte Creek Canyon. So we're going to just take a tour via GoPro through that transect. I think a lot of you probably haven't ever seen Paradise before it burned. I'm sure probably 50-50, right? It's weird up there now. Just it's so different. The amount of change that's happened in our lifetimes as people who pay attention to land is really disorienting. All these things that you thought were your landmarks are gone. And then especially, like, sometimes the street signs burn and like where am I? So we're driving up to Paradise, and it's hot and dry now. And there's a sense that this won't burn again because everything burned and there's no fuel. And that's true for now. I think one of the things I think about with that is that before the fire, Paradise was kind of deprived of tax revenue and barely able to function as a government. And right now they're flush because there's been a crazy multi-billion-dollar windfall of disaster funds. So the city can afford to pay for weed enforcement, like weed abatement officers and stuff like that. But if not that many people move back into Paradise, how is the government supposed to pay for things like weed abatement that currently keep it tidy? We know that it took 60 years for the fuels to grow into a condition that would support the campfire. But that thing that, probably won't happen in my lifetime. One of the big impacts that we see in the Eden fire is that a big impact of the campfire was on multi-generational poor. A ton of people who lived in Paradise in Magalia, they inherited their trailer from their grandma or from their parents who inherited it from their grandma. Same in Eaton. You know, the Altadena community is a black community. One of the kind of middle-class black communities of LA that has been there for a long time and really stable, passed on and perpetuated largely through multi-generational wealth in the form of a house that you transfer onto your kin. That is one of the things that evaporated in Paradise just like that. And so the people, we talk a lot about mitigation and how come these people aren't doing more to protect their home. And so here we are in Magalia, and we're getting close to the edge of the campfire. We're about to drive out of the campfire into the not campfire. And you can see, like, there's brush here. It's been 6 years since the fire. We've got, 3-4 foot tall brush. Paradise, everyone, Forest Ranch, Cohasset, they grow vegetation as well as anywhere in the world. Right? Like when the foresters grade the soil of the planet into what grows trees best, Site Class 1 is what you say about the places that have the best soil. Paradise, Forest Ranch, Cohasset, they're Site Class 1A because it was better than the best. Right? So some of these areas can grow like 15 tons of vegetation a year. That's a lot of work if you own an acre to keep up with that. So here we're still in the campfire scar. You can tell because it's bright and open and everything. And then right up here, it's like suddenly the photo gets kind of like, things get dark. It's shady. Temperature went down like 10 degrees as soon as we came out of the scar into here. And this is what Paradise looked like before the fire. And so I get here and I'm like, what the hell? Like, how come these people haven't cut their brush? How could you drive through the campfire every single day and see what just happened and then still live in a place like this? How can you do that? And so as we drive up to go do our burn, it just gets thicker and thicker and more claustrophobic, and I get willies I'm going to burn something, right? So I'm like, what the hell am I doing going to burn in the worst fuels on the planet? Like, what am I thinking? What am I doing here? And then you start seeing like these houses that have tarps on the roof and that the roof's caved in and there's a trailer out in front. And that's why people aren't cutting the brush, is like if you have a tarp on your roof and no electricity, like you're not gonna be able to fix your broken chainsaw. You're not gonna be able to hire someone to masticate. You're not gonna be able, it's really expensive to do this work. So now we're getting close to our destination, and I'm still thinking, like, what the hell are we doing coming up here to light this place on fire? But if you're not a fire person, just take my word for it that this is bad. Like, this is not what woods are supposed to look like. This is a legacy of cutting down all the big trees. There's a long history and we can tell these stories too. How did we get here? So we pulled into this driveway and like, what's going on here?
So we're burning the property today. We're trying to make it more fire safe. We've got a beautiful day. It's kind of wintertime or early spring, so it's safe to do it. And we're just trying to get the fuel level down, try to improve the health of the forest, and trying to prevent kind of catastrophic wildfires. When I really would like to encourage everybody to, to do this and take some steps now before a catastrophic wildfire comes again and toasts everything. I really want to try to protect the integrity of the forest, keep these big trees alive and healthy. So
yeah, so this is the Butte Prescribed Burn Association. Some of you are members. No experience required. anyone who wants to get exposure to fire, to learn how to burn, you can get on an email list, goodfire@bcrcd.org, and you can burn right up against someone's house. What we're doing here is we're burning strategically. We're calling this microcasting. So broadcast burning is when you let fires burn. And we're kind of starting at the house, burning little piles, and in doing that, we're creating this fuel break around the house so we can burn a little more aggressively once we aren't worried about burning the house down. There was a dog inside the house freaking out. It's like, Dad, there's a forest fire out there. And eventually, I think it got used to it. There was a guy who was home who didn't realize that. So we were burning for his landlord. He comes out, he's like, This is not going to save the whole world, right? But this is spreading knowledge. This is giving us all an opportunity to gain place-based knowledge, right? Fire is the teacher. And so when people like Colin do all the work of, he's been hand thinning and burning piles and everything here for 15 years, he's basically creating a playground for us to come experiment with fire. This was a pretty relaxed event. A lot of the people here hadn't burned before. And you learn a lot just by dragging fire around with a pitchfork. This creates kind of a container for safe experimentation. So here we're letting the fire back down a hill because that's against the wind, because that's the most controllable way to do it. So what we've done now is we've created this, the house is right off to kind of off to our right. We've created what we call a catcher's mitt around the house that's all black. And now we're going to do what we would call sending it. We've been doing a lot of these pine needle burns that aren't really that impactful. Pine needles fall the next year. What we really want to do is kill trees, because there's too many trees. And it's too hard to cut down all these small trees when you look at thousands and thousands of acres. So here we decided that we would light some fire below these trees without, they haven't been prepared, so we could kill them. And this is like, in us scaling up our prescribed burning, we want to up our game. We want to kill more trees with prescribed fire because there's too many trees, right? And it costs a lot of money to come chop them down with a machine or a feller buncher or whatever else. And so that's some of the planning work as geographers we've got to do, is figure out like, what's the sequence? How do you approach that? How do you focus around the community first so people are comfortable with you? Fire is not a precision tool. And the more that you push, the more likely that at some point you're going to have a boo-boo, and that could be really bad. So, our challenge is to make the most of the opportunities we have to put fire on the ground. It was windy yesterday, but it wasn't so windy that we couldn't do this safely. That's where all these resources I talked about, the coordination centers, all the other stuff that has been put in place and money we've invested in, can help inform this kind of work. It's not just a bunch of hillbillies running around lighting shit on fire.
How are you feeling right now?
Feeling good. I got kind of emotional when it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, first fire on the ridge.
Tell me about that.
Well, I don't know, just having gone through the campfire and getting into prescribed fire, it's kind of been one of my personal goals, is to see fire get on the ridge. Yeah, and so seeing a landowner light the ground on fire was awesome. So
yeah, driving through driving through Paradise is so hard right now. I hate it. Like all the broom and all the weeds.
yeah, no, I think about that too, and it's like you need to start reintroducing fire.
And you see the need for it everywhere. All these little weed patches between like a couple streets. Like we could light that with 2 people.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is like the amount of work that it would take to just manually do that or light it on fire, and if you light it on fire, you're making it safer for the future.
Yeah, and some of that stuff you could burn and be done with it in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So audio is a little bad there, but basically what we were saying, this is Kyle. He lived in Paradise during the campfire. His family lost their homes. His relatives lost their homes. It motivated him to get into fire and to learn about burning. And now what we're saying is, like, right now the town council won't let people burn in Paradise proper because they think it's going to traumatize the victims. And it's frustrating for us burners because we look at these weedy lots that are surrounded by roads or by vacant lots, And knowing what we know about burning, it's like we could go out and we could burn 10 vacant lots with no water. Like we didn't use water yesterday. We had like one little garden hose, burn 10 acres. That's possible. But there's this perception, this story that's been told that makes everyone in Paradise a victim, that is incapable of handling the emotions of seeing a flame or something.
I was part of the campfire. I live up in Yankee Hill, and we lost everything but our house. So my boss decided it would be a good idea to come up and get a little bit of the PTSD out of me. Mm-hmm. And it's been interesting to try and come up and, look at all the fire and all the smoke and realize that there is a good fire. That if you be preventative to some of this stuff, that, you can keep the fires away from you when they do come.
Yeah, it's a hard sell for I think a lot of folks today to look up and see smoke in the foothills.
Yeah, and I think it would have been for me too if I wasn't already up here. Mm-hmm. But I went back and forth. Greg asked me yesterday if I wanted to come up and do this, and I said no at first, and then I decided that I needed to start moving forward.
How was this experience different from what you might have expected? What did you expect it to be like?
I didn't know, to be honest with you. I knew that they did, broadcast burns, but I really didn't know what they were. And we've done burn piles for years up here. But this was way different, the way they, started it and got it going. It made me realize that it kind of is getting rid of all those lower fuels and stuff. I've dealt with fires for years. I've been through the Poe fire. I've been through the 08 fire and all the ones in between. But the campfire was a different animal. Mm-hmm. It came so fast. I watched it burn Concow, and then I watched it burn Paradise, and then I watched it come back and almost take us out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's hard to communicate how, you can have a November 8th that's like the campfire, and you can have a November 8th like today where the fires can behave completely differently.
Yeah. This year, for some reason, I don't know why, it's been harder. I've had a very emotional week. I found myself breaking down and crying at different times. And so it seemed to be also a good time to do this, mm-hmm. to see this and maybe try and get one step past that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've mastered it, but I'm trying.
Anything else you want to say to people, campfire survivors who saw the smoke plume today?
You know what? It's okay. It's showing that we can start cleaning up our forests. We can start making them safer for us. We're not going to stop living up here. You're always going to have your mega fire. That's not going to go away. And even the 100 feet clearances aren't going to save that. But if you can get out there and make a difference in what you're doing, then you'll have a better chance of your property making it. And I know the smoke and the plumes are hard to see, but know that there is some good fire out there, and it's helping to keep things more clear.
Yeah, a little bit, definitely. It definitely makes me think of driving down the Skyway with flames all over. But at the same time, it's really nice to see it being so controlled and having so many different teams thinking about different things, and just being here on a cool day and with good conditions. It's really great to see. It's healing, definitely, also, and yeah, it's just good to see that there's so many people that are thinking about this. And I see that a lot of people I've talked to here have some kind of roots with the campfire, and yeah, this is just so good for our landscape to do this, and I'm glad it's happening.
11:30 weather taken west of firing in Unit 2. Dry bulb temperature 7.6, that's up 3. Relative humidity 4.0, that's down 2. Break. I worked doing animal rescue after the campfire, and my sister's house burned, all my family's house was burned. That was my first interaction with a big wildfire. and it was scary and caused a lot of anxiety. And it took learning about fire to understand that we need fire and we need to make choices about how we use fire. We need to understand that our ecology has evolved with fire, and when we stop that from happening, it's going to burn no matter what. And when I got involved with prescribed fire and got involved with the reserve, I saw the health benefits for the ecology just exponentially growing as I see fire being reintroduced to the land after it's been deprived for so long. And the more I learn about it, the more important it seems to me. It also, because of the campfire causing so much anxiety, actually learning about fire and using fire as a tool has completely changed how I feel about it, and has made the anxiety go away. And the more you learn, the more that you understand that we need it and it has to be here, and we can have choices about how we use it.
Mm-hmm.
How's being out on burns different than like maybe you thought it might be?
Fire is very powerful. It's not only, like I said, used in ceremony, but just it has like a healing to it,
Mm-hmm.
And so being out here is, not only healing my spirit with everything that, I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's, like I said, powerful.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's definitely a great thing, a great program that they have, and
Yeah.
I'm excited to do more.
I kind of feel like, that all the ancestral knowledge of fire hasn't really gone away because fire holds it for us.
Yeah.
And that, like, if we just have time to spend with it, it will teach us what we already knew.
Yeah. That's the healing part of it, and it can be great medicine.
Yeah. It's good to stand out of the smoke too.
Right?
Like, how much smudging does someone need?
Right.
Thank you.